Sims. Kane Sims, the one and only.
Britain's finest, Mr. Kane Sims.
Dustin Coates.
I like it when you guys are together and talking about voice.
Without further ado,
Welcome to the show.
Hey, there we go. And we're live. Hope we're live. We must be live. There's a few people joined already. Welcome. If you're joining us early on, welcome to VUX World. For some reason, the little title here is stopped overlaying on top of the video that we played at the beginning. I'm not entirely sure why, but there you go. Anyway, we're here. We're live, and I'm joined by Laetitia Cailleteau of Accenture. Laetitia, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Yeah, glad to have you along. We've just been talking there about how much I've been multitasking trying to get this thing set up. So I'm just making sure we're live on LinkedIn, which we are, which is cool. Welcome to the show. Pleasure to have you on. We're here to talk about hyper-personalized voice AI, and probably I would imagine we'll get into some general voice AI industry observations, things like that. I'm sure. But for those that are not aware of yourself, Laetitia, I'm sure most people will be aware of Accenture. But maybe it's worth giving us the lay of the land, telling us what you do at Accenture, and tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you. So I'm Laetitia Cailleteau. I'm a long timer in Accenture. I did start a long time ago when it was still called Anderson Consulting. I'm the global lead for Conversational AI, which is very interesting for this particular topic. I've been founding also Liquid Studio, which is the innovation arm we have in the UK, where I think some of the innovation we're going to talk about are coming from. And then I also lead data and AI in Europe. So have a few hats. Really delighted to be here with you today to talk about some of our great innovative work in the space of voice UX. So thank you so much for the invitation.
No worries. Pleasure. So let's start from the beginning then. So you're wearing many hats. I don't know how you find time to sleep sometimes. It sounds as though you're doing a hell of a lot of different stuff. What is the kind of main kind of activities that you do, or what is it that you're crafting and helping to build at Accenture? What is Accenture's kind of role within the data and AI space, and also within the conversational AI space?
Yeah, I think, okay, so let me start with the data and AI space. So basically, especially now in the post-COVID or in a post-pandemic era, a lot of company and businesses have found it very hard to pivot and understand how to operate, or to manage their businesses, or to reinvent themselves. And we've seen a huge uptake of what we call data-driven reinvention, and moving to the cloud, where people really need the data like they never ever did before, to actually take the right decision. And historically, data has always been important, but they were not always very used, or things were done in a silo in POCs, and there was always some challenge around quality. So now a lot of the work we do is about really moving people to the cloud and enabling the data foundation so they can use quality data to actually measure the business, understand what are the key indicators for them to pivot, so they can pivot really fast. And obviously with data, there's also AI, yeah? So one of the key challenges of the post-pandemic is people have been working from home, things have been moving very fast, and people wanted to try new things. And, that dependence on having people as people available has been quite important as well, where there are a number of people had COVID and they couldn't be there. So we do a number of bots as well to kind of automate and mix the human workforce with the robotic workforce, if you want, to be able to cope up with people launching new product and all of that. So you have that flexibility to be able to scale, an hybrid workforce around that. So that's pretty much very, very busy, especially now with post-COVID or, during COVID kind of transition. A number of people are taking this, to the next level. And there's a lot of large transformation kind of program happening. There was some short-term, and now there's a lot of long-term kind of endeavors as well. So that's super exciting because everything is data first now, which is pretty awesome. And obviously, chatbot and voice bot and conversational AI are also picking up massively as on the way. In conversational AI more globally, well, I guess this is where this audience is doing a lot of stuff. So call center transformation is obviously one of the key areas where we do voice, primarily because the call center is transforming quite a lot. There's a lot of new technology with cloud AI that are out there that are making things that were not possible before. And with remote working, with typically some of the call center had outsourced some of the human capability to low-cost location with various degrees of capabilities, and most importantly, call center were scripted pretty much. People kind of had very scripted way of doing things, and those are quite dated now. They're typically quite system focused, and now as we're reinventing that fourth industrial revolution, we're competing against people like Amazon with an amazing service, or like some of the amazing kind of very human-centered tools that we have, like a phone, like Spotify, YouTube. Everything is actually quite done for the individual, and those scripts that used to be kind of written a long time ago that are actually kind of done from far away kind of lost touch. So this is a great opportunity to take this wave to actually do much more transformation and do voice AI and all of that. So a lot of call center, but obviously also using some of the virtual assistant and some of the apps too. So that's
Nice.
a bit of a whistle tour.
Yeah. Well, no, that's good. And obviously there's a hell of a lot going on, and Accenture involved in a lot of the, really, really big projects. And you mentioned the kind of digital transformation initiatives that a lot of large scale companies are going through, and even small scale companies as well, to be fair. But there's a lot of complexity involved in that, especially when you're dealing with infrastructure that has been part of an organization's heritage largely, and now all of a sudden it's moving into the cloud. There's a lot of risk involved in that, or perception of risk from the organization. So it takes skills and expertise and good management to actually make that happen. Curious there that I'd be interested in two things. One is where you think the interlink, or if there is an interlink between the migration to the cloud and voice and conversational AI capability, because you mentioned that it's making things happen that weren't possible before. So I'll be interested in those two areas. First of all, what is it making happen, or what's it making possible that wasn't possible before? And then maybe we'll get into where the link is.
Yeah, so I think what was not possible before, meaning when you look at natural language processing, now there's a lot of things, of voice processing, speech to text, or NLP, or text to speech. There's a lot of capabilities around this that are actually now available in the cloud, where you can just have very good quality coming out of some of that technology at scale, in hardly any time, and that was not possible before. I remember we did a project with the Irish Revenue Commissioner, was before Google Duplex got out at the time, and it was live, and it was voice UX. And the first attempt we did, I think it was in 2017. Like there was still a little bit of a delay, and you were still playing with things that were just not very. You had to play with a number of dimensions to kind of have something that was seamless and felt good. So we did that first attempt, and we're like, it's not good enough. And then 6 months after, we're like, okay, we have that. We actually have another patent in interactive voice where we do continuous listening, and we put this in, and we managed to get something that was very slick. And that really worked. That went in production. We actually, the first week we were in trial, and we were kind of thinking we will be learning for a week, and then we'll stop, we'll pause, we'll learn, and then we'll ramp up. And it worked so well that we stayed in production. And it's automating, I think, 60% of all the tax clearance type of processes in Ireland at the moment, and it's working super well. We have an amazing testimony actually from the CIO on YouTube for people that are interested. I can ping the link a bit later. But like those things were not possible like 5 years, like before cloud or before a number of things, because they can, not only the quality is kind of there, you can overtrain some of those things a little bit to make them better and complement it. But all of that was not possible, let's say 5 years ago.
Interesting. So that patent you mentioned, the interactive voice patent, so refresh us on what that's doing then. So it sounds like it's in the call center, is it? So it's constantly listening to the user on the other end. Is that what it's doing?
Yeah, so I guess when you're within the call center, you need to kind of play with some protocol called SIP, which are pretty old-fashioned, and to bridge the old way of voice streaming and the cloud processing, which is based on HTTP, and also some of the practices. If you just do the bridging and wait for a pause to stream so the NLP can understand and all of that kind of things, or start some of that, it's actually is quite slow. So what we have in that particular pattern is kind of a real-time stream of listening where we don't have to wait for pause to do the understanding, which is really helping the overall performance of the interaction.
Interesting. So it's beginning to process the NLP is beginning to do the processing before the audio has stopped streaming, essentially.
Yeah, but in a conversation like you and me, we pause and things like that. And, without that kind of technology, you kind of have to wait until there's a pause to kind of get it to the NLP and things like that, where we have something which is continuously kind of listening and helping if you want that flow, so you don't have to wait for pauses.
Interesting. Going back to that cloud discussion then, obviously the cloud has enabled things like processing speech data, speech to text, NLP, a whole bunch of capabilities, speech to text to speech rather, a whole bunch of capabilities. But then that's good enough to design an interaction, design a conversation, embed that within a call center or fire it up onto a virtual voice assistant or what have you. But a lot of the time, it needs to do something, doesn't it? It needs to, you mentioned their tax office in Ireland. To do anything with a tax office in Ireland, apart from a few kind of like light-hearted FAQs, you're going to need to do some kind of integration with the systems that they have behind the scenes. How are you observing moving to the cloud is making that either easier or more challenging? Is the transformation of organizations moving their infrastructure to the cloud making these kind of like more transformative conversations easier? And if it is, how so?
Yeah, meaning I think you're spot on. I always say there's no AI without SI. That's kind of my little snippets there. And I think for voice AI, we even have a different challenge where, when you do your voice design, it's much better to personalize, anticipate what the person will want to say. So you're much faster at understanding and your flow is actually much better. So on this example of the tax office, we actually looked up people when they were calling in because we had, we kind of mixed it with a dial tone. They could say as well their kind of citizen number or whatever identifier they had, and we would look who they were, and we were like, did we send them a letter? Did we do X or Y? So we could try to predict what they were going to ask for. And I think in voice AI is very important because open conversation having an automated open conversation is still pretty hardcore. So without that predictive kind of angle, you kind of lose quite a lot on performance because you have to match around something too broad. Yeah. So I think on your question of API integration or backend integration, I think very often what we do now with client, a lot of our clients have done API transformation as part of the first kind of era, if you want, of digital transformation. So a lot of companies now have a set of APIs that are available. Meaning, if you look at banking, all the banks in the UK have gone through open banking APIs and things like that. So if they've done that level of transformation, it's quite easy to go and pick. If they haven't, it's always a bit difficult, especially in voice AI, because you're in real time. RPA, for instance, if you want to go and try to mock up stuff, it's typically the performance needs to be very fine-tuned, or you want to do those things at the end, so you kind of mixing synchronous and asynchronous technology together. It's never really that good. So yeah, API are very important to kind of really have a truly personalized experience. And I think it's super important, much more in voice than in text, for the experience to be flowing, to have that integration and hyper-personalization going on.
Mm. So tell us about that hyper-personalization patent, and that's kind of what sort of sparked my interest. I thought that sounds interesting. Tell us what the patent is and what it enables.
Yeah, so maybe I should start with giving you a context of where is this coming from, because actually this is what inspired the patent. So when I stood up the studio 2016 in London, and we were very focused on human-centered design, trying to understand, people's challenges, doing design thinking, co-creation, and knitting in the back, emerging technology together to try to find, new ways of solving, challenges in the industry. And, AI was a big topic at the time, and I think it's still a big topic, and everybody was talking about it but nobody really knew what it was. And the type of question I would get from a lot of people is, can you explain me how is that going to help me in my industry and all of that kind of things? And so I was doing a number of pitches with a number of clients or external kind of forum to explain the power of AI to people and democratize, if you want, the understanding, because people were very fearful about what AI was, but primarily because they hadn't decomposed what's below it. And in that narrative, when I was going around, one of the things that was resonating quite well is there's a potential accessibility angle to AI. And by that, I mean, in the last 15, 20 years, when, internet was created and we did all those lovely websites, we actually excluded a number of people which are not digitally savvy, people that can't operate a computer, people that don't have internet at home, and that accessibility, or people that can't see, or people that can't hear well, and things like that. So there's a number, and at the time I was appointed at the European Commission as an expert for the trustworthy AI place, and there was a number of people representing those kind of group, and that have been digitally excluded, and we're saying we need to make sure we don't do it again. Because ultimately, despite all the endeavors, there's been a lot of challenge, and companies have been going more digital, but all the people that don't have that access were left out. So, and this accessibility angle and the digital kind of divide that was created was a key driver. So. And I always had a passion for all people, and that's when I reached out to the CEO of AD UK London, Paul Golden, don't know if it will listen, but basically where I just pitched him my idea, I said, I really think we can do something different around healthy aging in some way, and we started to do some session. We had what we call coffee tea party or tea party with older generation, where we started to create and do some proof of concept and kind of understand what they needed and see how this was working. And it was working pretty well. So we started with some very basic stuff where, there was a lady there that was probably 80 plus, and we were interviewing them around, some of the challenge they have in the day to day. And one of the story that came out was, she was quite emotional when we were talking about the challenge she had. And she was saying, well, I typically get a call once a month or once every couple of weeks from my family, and she didn't have a mobile phone, and she needed to get to the phone line, which was physically anchored into the wall. And she had a problem with the hip, and sometimes she was not fast enough. And she started to burst into tears to say, sometimes I miss it, and I don't get another call for a bit of time. And so the first use cases that we actually went on is, being able to text, have the voice assistant helping, texting with the family and voicing back some of the responses. So suddenly we didn't have to be synchronously kind of connected to the voice. We could actually decouple and get the older person, sending little messages and receiving them back. One of the key things that was coming back too is the older generation doesn't want to bug the younger generation. They're always worried they disturb because we're too busy and all of that kind of thing. So that was kind of creating, and one of the things that was quite mind-blowing is, like when we were kind of testing it with a few people, we had, grandparents and grandchildren kind of texting more than 52 times in a day, like they got hooked on some of it. And we were like, wow, this is pretty cool. There's so much stuff we can do. And then we started with a voice assistant. At the time, Alexa was not even out in the UK. So we shipped some of the first Alexa from US, and we started to play around with that big tower, and actually freaked out quite a lot of older people because they felt listened to. And then, there's new version that came on with the screen, and we kind of started to kind of explore, how, this can help them. One of the things that were freaking them out quite a lot as well was going in a retirement home. A lot of them were really worried about growing older and not being able to live in their own home, within their own community, and all of that kind of thing. So we developed a little bit this healthy aging kind of agenda, but also trying to buck some of the things like social isolation, so people could reconnect with their family, even being able to pick up the phone from the Alexa, say, Alexa, pick up the phone, or things like that, change people's life quite a lot. So that's a long story, but that's kind of the story of this particular patent. Obviously, when you go into the depth of designing and all of that kind of things, it became really complicated. Because, the way Alexa was working at the time is, you have to remember as a person all the command you send, otherwise she doesn't understand and things like that. So what we did is we created this patent, which is we just have to say, hello, okay. And then, the Alexa knows you. So she looks who you are and she kind of greets you, and she drives you through some of the routine. And the routines are actually things we configured to start with. We know if that person needs medicine, if that person, a few things we kind of collect at the beginning. But then we kind of learning as we go on, and we modify the voice interaction. So it's really a voice interaction that's designed for the end user, and that's evolutive. And that's, that really doesn't put too much strain on then remembering how to interact with the tech. Yeah. So that's kind of the concept of the patent. And in the back, we have a lot of APIs. So it can go from when we did the work at Hanover Housing Association, we had APIs around meetups for the local area. You could actually connect to the bike service. So that, they had a bike service where somebody was coming up in a bike and all the people were there. You could do your booking, get a link to say, oh, your appointment is there. We did like digital calendar integration. So, it's almost like a marketplace or API in the back that are actually coming across in a personalized experience where the user doesn't really need to be expert in knowing. We're actually learning, what they like and what they want and things like that.
So is it that kind of upfront onboarding kind of experience that feeds the personalization? Is that what it is? So if you say, I take my medication at 8 o'clock in the morning, it's these pills or what have you. I like jazz music, and my daughter's name is Michelle, and her phone number is this. Is that where you're getting? Is that what the onboarding process is like? And is that where you get the basis for this personalization from?
Yeah, so that's the kind of original model. But there was a number of things like encouraging people to do exercise is one thing. Yeah. So some of them had their Fitbit connected, and we would get the steps and all of that kind of thing. But what's the right number of steps for you to get a nudge to go on a walk, or things like that. Yeah. So we had some ideas at the beginning, but then it's you kind of learning what are the patterns of the person, and you can adjust some of those things as you go on if you want. Also, when we looked at the personalization was really important, because when you're actually looking at that category of age, it is the variability of needs you have is actually quite mind-blowing. And you have some people that are completely insomniac that would just do things. And so we also had a family and carer portal that could actually, if people gave consent, so the end user gave consent, you could actually get the family and carer view of that. So you could also potentially change some of those parameters as you were going on and monitoring some of them as a family member or as a care professional or things like that. Yeah.
Interesting. And so the patent then is, what is it? Is it for the kind of algorithms behind the scenes that allow you to either tweak things or allow it to make adjustments based on behavior? Like, is it a patent for the algorithm? Is it for the whole system? Like, what does it actually cover?
Yeah, so it's for the overall solution. Yeah, and there's not one algorithm. There's like there's a number of them depending on what we're looking at. Yeah, so if we look at physical activity, if we look at we have mind games as well to keep people busy. We even did a pilot with the NHS in Essex. Pilot with people with early onset dementia. It was group pilots, but where we were playing with things like things to help them in case of crisis, and you would see things where so that every bit of functionality is almost having its own kind of way of learning what it means for that person, and then you have that flow, if you want, of capability. You have that you can evolve over time too. But we also had, as part of the solution, we also have, and we don't. It depends on the capability of the end user, but we have a little feedback kind of screen coming up on the, you can configure if it comes every week or every 2 weeks, or depending on the capability of the end user, and we kind of give them a little bit of, this is the summary of the week. You've done more steps. You did that, or you did that many social events, or that kind of stuff, and we give them a comparison to what they used to, and encourage them to do more, things like that, and then we ask them for their feedbacks. Yeah. So then we get the feedbacks as well from there. We also collect some feedbacks from that automated feedback loop.
Interesting. This almost sounds like it. Like, so, is this just a standalone product in its own right, or is this something that is like, as part of Accenture's, whether it's consultancy or whether it's the Liquid Studio kind of innovation labs or whatever, is this still kind of something that is like part of Accenture or Liquid Studio, or is this a product in its own right that someone can just go to the website, sign up, pay for it, and get on with it?
Yeah, so at the moment, meaning we have a SaaS service for it, but Accenture is not a B2C kind of company. We normally work for the client, so this is something we bring as an asset to some of our partners and clients, and so it's actually it's part of our offering where people can have a piece of it if you want, yeah. So we don't have to rebuild it all, and they can go fast. But it's not a standalone offering because we're not a healthy aging company, I suppose. We're more consultancy.
It's interesting though, because the healthcare market is obviously a huge market, and evidentially from the Microsoft and Nuance news around the acquisition, it's a big market, and lots of people have tried to do something in the kind of voice AI space for the older generation. Heidi Culbertson comes to mind with Ask Marvi, and a number of others. Constant Companion is another company who's doing something fairly similar from the sounds of things. So yeah, it's interesting that you kind of take that approach. I suppose it's a big effort to turn it into a fully marketable product. It needs a full company around it supporting it, doesn't it? Really, if you were going to actually try and market it of any kind.
Yeah, meaning there's been a bit in the past some discussion about spinning up a startup from it, but we haven't proceeded from it. I think the challenge we always had was the commercial model for it, because we were looking at an older person holistically, and when you look at the way the UK is actually set up in terms of healthcare, you have health somewhere, you have social services some other places, then you have a number of charity. So, it's actually quite broken down into silos. And then if you put the lens of, a lot of the budget are also within region or within areas. I was putting a lot of my hope on the Healthy Aging Grand Challenge, which I don't know if you followed through, but Theresa May launched just before she left, as she launched the Grand Challenge on AI and some of the other things. So we went through the Grand Challenge, and we were in the last bucket, but I was really hoping we would get national reach from it, but we didn't manage to get kind of through. I've been told by the Grand Challenge team that they actually, post-COVID or during COVID, they're kind of looking at other ways. But for me, the only way, because you can always sell some of those solutions, for instance, as commercial product, like telco, instead of selling you a telephone, then I could sell you, Alexa, plugging into a service or things like that. So, but then people have to spend quite a fair amount of money. So for me, for that solution to be truly embracing what we were trying to do at the beginning, which is, kill the digital divide, needs to be, driven from a national level, helped with the government in the UK. Otherwise, we kind of defeat a little bit some of the purpose, where it becomes something that's good and that's helpful for people that can afford it. And ultimately, I think it's a shame, but so I'm still having a lot of hope that it's been a long journey, but it's just the beginning of the journey, and things are going to change soon.
Yeah, interesting. So, what would be an example then of two different people using this same solution, and just an average user journey example of two people using this system and having different personalized experiences?
Yeah. So. So one example, I don't know, you wake up in the morning, you actually get your news or something like that. It kind of reminds you what time of the day it is. Maybe it gives you a photo of, if you have early onset dementia, I could give you a photo. It used to be your anniversary and you have the picture popping up or whatever. If you take medicine, they would say, oh, this is time for your medicine. You can actually plug a pill box as well to just make sure you have a bit of IoT in there. And people, if they lose memory, they don't take 2 times and things like that. And then, what the experience would do typically is we're quite heavy on social isolation. So we go check up in the digital diary if there's anything. So today you have the nurse coming up at this time, and you have that coming up later. Or today you have nothing. Do you want to go and check up what's out there? And then it would look at your preferences and then just drive you through, oh yeah, there's a coffee at the church, or, like we would pick those up from Meetup. Or what we've done as well for Hanover, we also had a portal where people could feed events to our cohorts, yeah. So, I don't know, some of those things. And then they would register. When they register, it would go in the calendar. So if they register in a couple of days, they'll get the reminder and all of that kind of stuff. Then you would say, oh, maybe that's time for a walk now. You haven't moved so much. That, and we would just pick up the right time of the day where you like to do your walk, or maybe suggest you call your friend for the walk and things like that. Yeah. And one of the features that was very popular, and I think it's harder for us to kind of understand as younger people maybe, is the we call it the security checklist. Before people go to bed, when you say Alexa good night, they really like to Alexa, good night. It would just load the home care routine and say, we could configure what they wanted there, and they could change it as well as they see it fit. Like, have you cut off the gas? Have you locked the door? Have you fed the cat? And they really like that mental checklist of, and then they could say yes or no. And if they haven't, you were just like, okay, so go and do it and come back. And then you're just like, and then you're like, okay, good night then. This is one of the things that was very popular. They really like that particular feature.
That's good.
About the daily routine before going to bed.
Yeah, I could do with that myself, to be honest. We've put these we've got these lights in the garden now, but the thing with them is there's no power. So we've got these lights that are plugged in my son's bedroom on a Wi-Fi plug that shines blue, and the cable goes out of the window. Then I've cable tied it to the drain pipe all the way down the house. Then I'll go downstairs and I'll string the lights along to the other drain pipe. And the only way you can turn them on and off is to tell Alexa to turn the lights on. But when you're in the garden and it's dark and you're having the barbecue, you get it to turn the lights on. You totally forget about it. And sometimes I haven't noticed that they're still on until the next Friday on an evening. So I could do with one of them checklists without a shadow of a doubt.
One of the things you make me think about, and I didn't talk about, is we did a lot of work with our legal team around all of that. Yeah. And the reason why you made me thought about that is when you were describing your installation, I was like, that sounds like a security. Yeah, that's a security hazard.
Sounds like it should be a security hazard. It is. Definitely is.
So, meaning we had a lot of lawyers, and we use some of the principle of privacy by design and all of that kind of things, and we, we're very heavy on consent collection and really kind of be very clear about what we use things for and not, and all of that kind of things before they actually onboard into the service, because that's super important. But that's a huge piece of work. I think I had 8 different type of lawyer crafting different view on the platform, and that was a huge undertake, a big headache. Well, we've done it now, so it's all good. But that was quite complex.
Yeah, I can imagine that was a bit of a mission. Has any of this stuff, I mean, obviously this has roots in accessibility and making not just technology accessible, but general, making connection accessible to other people, making people's kind of able to access other things, like events and things like that. So its roots are in accessibility, but the nature of a personalized voice experience is pretty much like the promise, I suppose, of our own personal assistants. If we have Alexa or Google Assistant or whatever, it should be molded to us. If we ask for the news, it should play our news. If we ask for our calendar, it should be our calendar, and all that kind of stuff. How much of this then has any of this bled over into other areas that Accenture have been working on? You mentioned we've been working on a lot of like contact center automation projects, things like that. Has any of this personalization ethos kind of bled into other areas that you and your team have been working on?
Yeah, no, completely, actually. Meaning it's not like we use it only in that context, it's just more so yes, completely. So we obviously leverage as much as we can of the intelligence we create across various we have an asset in Accenture, in the conversational AI practice, which is called the Conversational AI Platform, which is pretty much of a middleware in between channels and backends. And you can use any NLP, any speech to text, any text to speech, pretty much. Yeah. So that helps us, when we have clients that want to support, I think we have more than 25 channels. You can be going from, like typical call center software to Connect or some of the latest to MS Teams to, WhatsApp and all of that kind of things. Yeah. And then we have zero code experience design, and we can plug in some of the experience there, but we can also use any NLP, any speech to text we want, depending on the interaction. So, and most of the time we use what feels best, for most, but sometimes, if you have to do, I don't know, something for the UK government and you have to speak Welsh and understand well, things like that, then you can bring customized bits so you have a solution that's actually working, multilingual and all of that kind of things, and where you have to play with a few of those technologies together. And we brought a lot of those use cases on this platform, where we have what we call industry cartridges, where we have pre-built experiences like, with, for instance, conversational banking with open banking in the back, with a lot of voice experiences that we crafted with our industry experts and with our agencies as well. Accenture is one of the biggest agencies in the world, with the likes of Fjords and things like that. So we create those and they pre-packaged. So for our client, we can just focus on their specific needs and tweak them up and plug them in there. Change the URL of the API, open banking, off you go. Yeah, it can go really fast.
Wow. Are conversations with different companies within the same industry so formulaic and similar that you can just lift and shift the entire conversational pattern and change the APIs in the background, or is there any other kind of lifting that needs to be done?
Yeah, so it depends. Meaning with the Conversational AI Platform, which is kind of a universal middleware, if you want, we abstracted a lot of things, so it's very flexible. And our industry cartridge, we can lift them and shift them. Obviously, each client is having a specific need, so this is an amazing jump start, but it needs a little bit of tuning for the brand alignment and then a number of things, and obviously their processes. But yeah, you can pretty much use quite a lot of that base, because the processes, meaning when you think about a utility provider, you just kind of challenge your bill, or you want to move, or like all of those things that you can do as user are pretty similar. So you can have a pretty robust starting point from the outset. Then you can what we really do is we can plug in their channels, what they prefer. We can tweak the middle, because they're kind of there, and then plug in the API, and then it's actually starting to work. And you have the human oversight. You kind of see when you fail, and you kind of tweak it as you go, and you kind of evolve those conversations and as you learn. Yeah. Maybe you have a leg that's needed for that particular client that they didn't plan. But it's those learning of collaboration in between the machine and the humans to kind of continuously improve it. But typically, when we go live, you need, in production, depending on the volume you push through, at the beginning, maybe you need a little bit of human oversight, but it's a number of those things end up being quite transactional at the end, and you can have very good return in terms of containment of automation.
Interesting. So another element of personalization that is I wanted to speak about is, so the personalization we've been largely speaking about is personalizing the almost like the functionality part of it, personalizing what it actually does in tailored around the needs of the user. So for example, the example you gave around walking times or whatever, the thing that's personalized there is that the time that it reminds you to go for a walk is different based on the user. Excuse me. The contact center implementations can be personalized if you, for example, do a lookup into a CRM, find out what product someone's just bought, give them information about that return policy for that product or something. So you're personalizing the interaction based on the function that's being performed, if you like. But another way of personalizing something potentially is based on the actual interaction layer. So not the functionality, but the actual conversational layer. So for example, if someone's angry, the bot might respond slightly differently with a different tone. Perhaps it escalates someone to a live agent. If somebody, for example, Alexa has these features whereby you can put it on brief mode if you want to, and therefore it doesn't go elaborate. It will just play a sound to confirm something or something like that. And whether this is, I'd be interested in whether you would describe this as personalization or not, and also whether this is something that you consider when it comes to personalizing. Do you also look at personalizing the conversational layer, or is it predominantly around the functional layer?
Now, that's a really good question. We've done but there's different technology underpinning it. We've done a lot of work around knowledge graph for dynamic conversation. We call it dynamic conversation. Or scriptless conversation. So there's a number of scenarios where scriptless conversation are actually, from a tech perspective, if you really think about it, wanting to have a solution that works at the end, makes a lot of sense. So for instance, you're discussing with somebody a mortgage, the appetite to risk, and before you actually go into a mortgage. So where there's a lot of interaction in between the bot and the human to understand what the human wants and like and prefer. But you don't need that API call in the back, yeah? So if it's not procedural, because, if I want to, change, move address, it's quite, okay, which address, it's very procedural, and you ultimately need the backend call. So you don't really need that dynamicity, if you want, because you don't really have it, and, you just want a transaction happen. And so when you have more complex interaction in between the human and the robot, like trying to understand somebody's appetite to risk and all of that, you can start using different technology around knowledge graph, for instance. Yeah. So where you actually kind of define your tree and how you navigate it, and you want that fluidity, and then typically you can use natural language generation. But when you move through your graph, you have a complete dynamic conversation, and at the end of it, maybe you have a score on the appetite to risk that you can feed, and you can go into something procedural, because the whole process needs to kind of get all those data and pull them through or whatever. So yes, we do that, and we use the type of knowledge graph technology. Then you also talked about different modes, yeah. So you can have different level of personalization on the conversation, depending on, we call them people like you. Because, segmentation of end user, when you look at the industry, a lot of people put people in bucket because they're under 25 or they're this or they're that. But, we can plug into some of our customer analytic records or some of that customer segmentation. And what we do is we kind of look at people in terms of behavior, similarity of behavior. So, like you mentioned, you had a young kid before. So, like we can know, depending on which client we are, which access to data, if, the person having a kid, normally you kind of see differences in various patterns. So, you could be like people with young kids or people that are going to retirement and things like that. And then you can start, having different modes. Yeah. The challenge with all of that is it's quite expensive, obviously, to do all the testing, the configuration, and all of that kind of things. Yeah. So, like from a client perspective, you need to find the right balance in what's, what's efficient and what's personalized with what's really needed. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah. One of the things that I would love to see, and it's related to personalization and it's also related to accessibility, is we spoke to Heidi Culbertson from Ask Marvi ages ago. So Ask Marvi is a similar sounding platform, probably not as robust and as large. I don't want to say robust because it is robust. It's not as large and as feature rich as what you've been describing, but it started out by allowing an older relative to text their daughter, or the daughter to text the relative, and it will play it through the smart speaker and stuff. One of the things that we spoke to her about is what kind of design considerations do you need to take into account when you're designing for an older person versus a younger person? And there was a few things that were really obvious, like older people need more time to think, generally speaking. So leaving a mic open for 7 seconds sometimes is actually pretty difficult, because sometimes they might need a bit longer than that to think. Also, it is a better user experience in a lot of cases, she said, to have the voice slowed down, so speak a bit slower, and things like that. And so then you've got, like, we've had TiVo on the podcast, and they've been talking about, which I think they've actually released now, with pin drop, the ability to be able to recognize by the sound of someone's voice an approximate age. And so if you're a child and you say, play me something cool, it's not going to go away and play you like haunted movies or like, films with profanity or whatever. It's going to play you some kids stuff. And so the combination of those two things, being able to understand or at least profile an approximate age of somebody, and in light of knowing that, being able to change the interaction dynamically in response to it, so that when an assistant or someone calls a call center and the AI picks up that it's an older person, it automatically leaves the mic open for 10 seconds rather than 7. It automatically slows down the tone of the voice. That's the kind of stuff that I'm keen to see a bit more of. Curious about what your perceptions or what your thoughts are about where this is going. Where is personalized voice AI going in the future, based on what you've seen and observed and worked on so far?
That's an interesting question. There's a number of ways to kind of answer. Meaning, we always voice is an important for our client. It's also an important representation of their brand. Yeah. So people are very fussy about what kind of voice. So there's the kind as well. I know for the Irish revenue, for instance, we were deploying in Ireland, and we didn't. It was not possible to kind of have an American accent or British accent, because it would have been sacrilege. Yeah? So we had to kind of go and find the right voice, and then that's why we picked up Polly at the time, and we did a lot of SSML on it. So we kind of, with SSML, we can slow it down and we can just tune a little bit some of it. So yes, I'm with you. This is very important. This is super important. This is super important for the brand image, but this is also super important for the usability of things, But, the voice, the jargon, the ontology, like all of those things, people use different, different generation use, different things. So it's not only the voice and the pose and all of that and the pace, is also the words you use and all of that kind of things. Yeah. In my so a couple of thoughts from what I've seen out there. So personalization is amazing if you can do something about it. you were using an example of if somebody gets angry, it needs to escalate or things like that. We actually did that at one of our clients, and then we turned it off at the end because, like when you and I have a conversation, I could get a little bit more aggressive for 2 seconds, but we're just trying to level set up something. And, like in a normal case, this wouldn't go to anybody. And we had some cases where some of that was just escalating too much, and actually the people picking up were like, why do I have that call? Yeah. So it's quite hard to actually, in a conversation, to kind of grasp it. So I think it's still a bit early. Then I think the intonation, I think there is a lot of information in intonation. I forgot the name of the model, but the words, I think it was 20%, and the intonation, is how the gesture, and then I forgot the name of the model. Which model is it? I forgot.
I can't remember. I know what you're saying though. It's like 7% of what you say, 30% how you say it, and 60% like how you're looking when you say it, something like that.
Exactly. So basically, like the 7% is quite small. The how you say it is having some information, and then what you're using to convey it is also very important. I think we're starting to go into some of those levels. Then the thing that's really important for clients. So in healthcare, when we work with older people or when we work with 6 people, the empathy is actually very important. So if you get the feeling of somebody, maybe they feel low, they're depressed, things like that, that information is important to capture, because you actually, this is an important thing for your process or for your industry to consider in a downstream, diagnostic or things like that. Yeah. What I found is getting the angry or getting the happy or whatever, all of those things for, like, let's say, big telco company, it's like the current process doesn't really do that when you think about it. When you call your telco and you're not happy about your bill, you're kind of sticking with the same person for really long, and it's probably when you've been spending an hour, they give up. I kind of give you to somebody if you're lucky, or maybe they just, depends which provider. So then you have that information from an IT perspective, but then the current processes of the company are not made to deal with it. So, those are true questions about reinventing some of the operations going on, because, you're going to pass to a human at the end, or, those things that then needs to run quite smoothly. So, like a lot of thought needs to be kind of going on, and I guess there's no silver bullet yet. One of the other thought I was having when you were asking the question was, if you look at things around channel of communication and how you communicate, there is a very generational thing. Like my son, for instance, if I send him a normal text, he wouldn't pick up. It needs to be WhatsApp, or it needs to be tweet, I don't even Instagram, right? Otherwise I just get nothing back. Yeah. I'm old-fashioned. I use Facebook. Like some of those stuff. So there is truly, and in the example we were talking about, the older generation is used to different things. As we're growing older as well, there's people don't hear as well, or so you adjust some of your communication channel with what you prefer. So I think there is a truly generational thing. So kind of thinking about some of that is important, but probably by channel as well.
Interesting. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate you spending some time with us, Laetitia. Really do. If people want to reach out to you or follow what you're doing with Accenture, where's the best place for them to go and do that?
Yeah, I guess they can do it on LinkedIn. I'll be delighted. Thank you, Kane. It was a very nice way of ending the day. I really enjoyed the conversation today. So looking forward to maybe come back in a little bit of time.
Yes, indeed. always welcome. Always glad to have the conversation. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. And everybody else, thank you for joining us, whether you're listening live or whether you're listening on Monday when this comes out on the podcast. If you're not subscribed already, do head to vux.world/subscribe. And next week, that will give you the notification for next week. Next week, we're speaking to Davide Piero Petramala of Avaya, which is going to be interesting. Find out what they're up to in this space. Have you worked with Avaya, many Avaya contact centers, Laetitia?
Yeah, there's a few of that.
Yeah, cool. Well, we'll find out a lot more about what they're doing next Thursday. Same bat time, same bat channel. And until then, we'll see you later.
Thank you.